Hi, everyone. This is lecture 2.1 of Human Growth and Development. Let me share my screen. Okay. And full screen. Okay. So, basic reproduction. So, it's something that you've all had before. There's the male reproductive cell, which is the sperm, the female, which is the ovum. Human life begins as a zygote, which is a single cell formed by the fusion of those two, the sperm and the ovum. It's composed of DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. Uh, Information on our DNA is readily available through genetic testing. We have mapped the entire human genome. We have more than 25,000 genes, and there are 46 chromosomes, 23 from mom, 23 from dad. That makes us who we are genetically. When we talk about uh, the possible combinations, there are just trillions of combinations of what we can become with that combination. So if you have blonde hair and both your parents have dark hair, that doesn't mean you're the male carrier's child. It's genetically possible somewhere in your evolutionary genetics, somebody had blonde hair. So there's no way to know for sure. Okay. We know that less than 3% of pregnancies will produce twins, and three or more are even more rare. But if it's in your history, your genetic history, there's a possibility because it's in your genetic line. And again, just a picture of the genetic code. When we talk about monozygotic twins, these are actually genetically identical because it's the ovum that was split. In other words, one sperm fertilized both. So this way we have an identical match. And even with that, there's still some subtle differences. Retinal scans, fingerprints, but much of the genetic code, if not 99.9%, is going to be in common. Dizygotic, since they're two separate ova, two separate sperm, they're more like siblings in the extent that they're not identical. There'll be some things, of course, that's in common because you're talking about both the same parents genetically, but it's not the exact same as having one egg and one sperm. Multiple births, triplets, quads, etc., sextuplets. Most of the times it's because of fertility drugs. And, you've heard of stories like the woman who had 8 children. Just imagine trying to care for 8 babies at the exact same time. Physically, you just couldn't do it. You would need to have help. We do see multiple births, one in about 86 in Caucasian race and one in 70 in the African American race. Remember that 23rd chromosome is the one that establishes the sex of the child. Of course, females are XX, males are XY, and it's the father's sperm that determines the sex of the baby. And again, so you can just see that genetically a nice graphic here to show that combination. George Mendel, basic genetics, dominant and recessive traits. Dominant traits are always written with a capital letter, recessive traits with the smaller letter. The dominant trait always shows, even if there aren't two of them, even if there's just one of the alleles that has the dominant trait, the dominant trait is going to show. Your genetic code is called your genotype, and the physical characteristics that we see are known as your phenotype. So when this genetic code is transferred, like I said, if there's a dominant trait there, then it will show uh, uh, in all of the cases. So if both parents have dominant traits, it's always going to be a dominant trait. If we have someone who has a recessive, the possibility is there if both parents have a recessive trait. So if you got a recessive trait from mom and a recessive trait from dad, then you would have genetically the coding, the genetic coding to have the recessive trait. And then we talk about there are some polygenic traits. The ways something combines or are modified can cause different things that happen because of the environment that may have been passed down. Uh, Sex X-link disorders tend to see more in male because, again, males only have one X chromosome, they're XY, females are XX. So, if something missing or is lacking on one of their X chromosomes, they still have an extra X as kind of as backup, as a spare. And then there are some genetic diseases. Again, if certain diseases run in your family, you may want to consider genetic testing before deciding to have children. Like I said, we tracked and broke down DNA in the human genome. It's an awesome read. It's a very long read, but if you ever have some time, it talks about how everything broke down, and it does help us to understand different things that may be passed on genetically so we can actually look and check to see if there are any issues involved that we can deal with prior to uh, birth and even after birth. Some things are inherited, some things happen to us because some of our genes may have been damaged. Sometimes we have a spontaneous mutation. It just comes from nowhere. It's nowhere in anybody's genetic code. And sometimes things in the environment, like being exposed to X-rays or mercury or uh, you know, different types of viruses can cause mutations of the genetic code. Some of them are Down syndrome, that's trisomy 21. There's a issue, we get an extra X on the 21st chromosome. Fragile X, typically, again, we see in males, damage to part of the X chromosome. Sickle cell anemia, Tay-Sachs, and Klinefelter syndrome are specific to certain groups of the population, but can be seen in others based on what the genetic code is and the history. When we talk about genetic counseling, it helps people to decide, hey, what should I do? I have this particular disorder. What are the chances of, and probability of me passing on this particular disorder to my children? So they would look at family history and parents' age, do blood work, urine samples, etc. So prenatal testing is done once a woman is, pregnant. Ultrasound, of course, is done a couple times during pregnancy to see the development of the zygote embryo fetus. Uh, Sampling the villa in order to test for any lacking nutrition or any lacking I said developmental things that would be going on at a particular time through that zygote embryo fetus. Amniocentesis, where some amniotic fluid is withdrawn from the womb and tested. Again, just a sample picture so you can get an idea. Screening, I mean, there's tons of screenings that are actually done and available. That's why if you suspect anything, you may want to do genetic counseling. So, just because you may have something in your background does not mean that you're definitely going to have issues. Review and a sample question, sample question. Temperament is definitely a push from genetics, where personality is a push from nurture, from environment. And there are certain genes that are passed on. Some are more sensitive to others in the environment. So that whole idea of nature versus nurture is not that it's really one or the other, but really about how much. We tend to see a little bit more of a push in some things from nurture and in other things from nature. So, when you look at animals that are in similar environments versus different environments, can you see a difference between the two? So how much is nature? How much is nurture? The twin studies was a classic research where they looked at sets of twins who had been separated at birth, moved around the country, and there was one that was just so ironic. Uh, Two men were twins, separated at birth. Both worked at a McDonald's as a part-time sheriff who went to the same Florida beach every summer, just 1 week apart. Both had first wives named Anne, second wives named Betty. Both had dogs named Toy. They used the same toothpaste, Vatamacum, which was an unusual brand of toothpaste. So, uh, and there were, some were two were raised in completely different homes where people were much more stoic or much more open to laughter. And both of the identical twins were full of laughter. So was that genetic, since they weren't exposed to it in their environment in a stoic home? So physical traits, intelligence, again, more research has to be done, different types of intelligence. When we talk about the big five personality theory, which you probably remember from Intro to Psychology, two, neuroticism and extroversion tend to have a genetic link. Okay, so certain traits, again, are contributed more from genetics than others. And you don't have to memorize all these traits. It's a good overview of some of the different ones that are out there. When we talk about some of the psychological disorders, we do see that there's a push for schizophrenia, major depression, alcoholism, autism spectrum, and attention deficit disorder. And let me stop the share for a minute.